If you've ever wondered, am I being too harsh? Or is it too late to start setting boundaries? You are not alone. Joining me today is a wonderful Kathy Cunningham who helps us understand why boundaries aren't building walls. They're about building respect, responsibility, and healthier relationships. From emotional pushback to the financial entanglements, we'll walk through the tough moments and the healing breakthroughs that come when parents stand in love. This is your guide to finding peace in parenting without losing yourself in the process. Welcome to Warfare Parenting, faith-driven strategies for struggling parents of teens and adult children. I'm your host, Laine Lawson Craft. You're in the right place if you're battling with prodigal children, facing family crises, or seeking spiritual guidance in parenting. Today, we'll equip you with powerful biblical strategies to reclaim your child's destiny and restore hope in your family. Let's step into this faith-filled journey of hope and healing together. Kathy Cunningham, thank you so much for coming in today. Listen, we are so excited. We all struggle with boundaries at times in our lives. And, you've been doing this over 30 years. You're a fantastic Christian coach. You've been in ministry, you've done all kinds of things. And we have just so enjoyed having you here with all your valuable insights and expertise. Today, we're talking about boundaries, and I'm just so glad you're here.
Oh, thank you, Laine. It's been great. I've loved just really navigating all these really hard issues. And this is a big one. In fact, this is a word that most people don't like.
Well, and I have here one of the first things I want to say. Why is it important for parents
Mhm.
to set boundaries with their adult children? And what are some of the most common situations that require them? So let's first talk about boundaries. Why are they important?
They are so important, but they're important that you do them correctly, that they're healthy boundaries. People misuse boundaries often. And a true healthy boundary is to protect a relationship, not to harm it. And I think that's where the misconception comes in. And some of the most common areas with parents and adult children are going to be in the area of finances, kind of navigating how much do we help? When do we help? What does that look like? Living arrangements. Do they live with us? Do we help with their living arrangements? How much do we spend on that? And this is a big one, involvement in personal decisions. That's an area that we need to decide. Often it's them going to put the boundaries, but we need to have boundaries around that. And the last one I would say is the time that we spend together. And I know many parents would say, I want to spend every moment of every day, but is that the best thing for the relationship?
Right. Those are some strategic,
Mm-hmm.
places that we
Yeah.
must look at when
Mm-hmm.
we talk about boundaries. I have here, how do boundaries promote healthy relationships and mutual respect between parents and adult children?
Boundaries create clarity. They help people know what is theirs and what is not. They know what will be done and what will not be done. Now, the problem is that often people create boundaries, but they don't talk about it. So, if you're creating boundaries around something with either your adult child that you've never had before and you don't tell them, then that's going to be a problem. So, communication and boundaries go together very much as a pair, for it to truly be a healthy situation.
Well, what are some practical steps? That's really strategic here. What
Yeah.
are some practical steps that we
Yeah.
can do um, to begin setting boundaries? Let's just assume, we recognize that boundaries have
Yeah.
been a problem for us with our
Mhm.
adult children. How can we start stepping this out?
Well, the very first thing you got to do is be clear about what boundaries you need to set and why. So you need to look at your own emotional health, and are you being respected? What is it that you are beginning to feel is off balance? Because we know. And really, one of the biggest indicators of a problem with boundaries, whether we want to call it boundaries or limits or whatever, is a feeling of resentment begins to seep up. So when we see that, we need to ask ourselves why, and we need to spend some time on the why and the what and how does that need to change before we even set a boundary, approach the person. We need to be very clear on why and what do we need to do.
Well, that leads me to, how do we communicate these
Hmm.
boundaries clearly and effectively, especially, when how do you open up a conversation if it's
Yeah.
been difficult in the past? How do we do this?
This is hard. And this is where I've said in previous things that we've talked about, previous podcasts, we have to start on our own emotional health first. If we're not healthy enough to have a conversation that could get a little emotional, and we're going to get emotional too, we probably need to navigate that differently. Either bring somebody else in or have somebody else communicate that. But it's not going to be helpful if we go to talk about a boundary and everybody, basically gets emotionally dysregulated. Everybody's mad, and it's a big explosion. It's going to make things worse. So, first of all, we want to be very clear. We want to be respectful. We want to state facts, not feelings. And we just want to lay out with small steps. So, if we have 20 boundaries, we suddenly realize we need to put in place, start with one and start with an easy one.
Well, right here, I've got here some examples. Let's talk
Yeah.
about examples of healthy
Mhm.
boundaries that they might set regarding finances, living
Okay.
arrangements, or emotional involvement. I mean, what are some healthy? Let's look at what a healthy boundary in finances looks like.
Okay. So let's say you're realizing you're doing too much. This is not helping, or they're using those finances in a way that is not appropriate. You would sit down and have a conversation that we are happy to have a time frame for you to work through this, but we're going to be getting to a point of doing less and less of financially supporting you. But what we want to do is help you brainstorm how you can do that better. So we don't want to just suddenly take everything away if we've been doing things. That's not fair, and that would be hard. And nobody that goes to that case of they probably can't do it on their own. But we don't want to overdo it to where they're not learning how to do it on their own. So we have a conversation that this is going to be ending soon. We tell them what that's going to look like, but we're going to help you get on your feet so you can start taking care of your own things. So
Well,
that
and I
would be
guess,
kind of what that would look like.
yeah, and I think that we could apply that same
Hmm.
kind of template for living arrangements or emotional involvement. Hey, listen,
Absolutely.
we just want you to know that
Things
you've
are
been living with us
shifting.
three
Yeah.
3 years, and we've made a decision that
Yeah.
we're going to help you find a way to get on your own, and then maybe even have a time frame, right,
Hmm.
Kathy? Like, I think in 6 months you
Absolutely.
need to be in your own living arrangement, and let's mastermind together right now
Mhm.
how we can make this goal possible. Is that a good way to do it?
Absolutely. Again, it gives time, it gives space, but you're not just pulling the rug out. You're giving them time to get on their feet, but you're also putting limits. And I love time frames. I think it's a great thing to have. In 1 month, we're going to revisit this and say, where are we? Like maybe this is going to be a 3 month plan. So in 1 month, we're going to evaluate where are you at? How are you doing with that? Have you saved some money? So we're going to step with them through this to get them on their own.
I love this. That is so great. I do want to talk a little bit about the navigating negative emotions.
Yes.
What emotional challenges do parents typically face when setting boundaries, such as guilt or fear of conflict, and how can we manage these feelings about these boundaries?
Well, the biggest one I hear from parents around this is that they feel guilt. So again, remember the mom guilt we talked about? It comes in full force. And they feel unloving, and they feel that if they set a boundary, they're going to lose their adult child. And the reality is that when you've done everything for somebody and you suddenly are shifting, they're not going to be happy. But most of the time, that will change as time goes on. So you're going to have to get a little bit of a thick skin because the reality is, and it is, I always tell people, you either take short-term solutions, and then you have short-term pain, but then you have long-term problems, or you take short-term um, pain, I think I'm saying this right. Tell me if I'm not. Short-term pain for long-term solutions, or short-term comfort for long-term pain. So
That's right.
that's basically what we're doing here. So is it going to be uncomfortable? Is it going to be painful for everyone? Yes, for a short term. But then you have a long term of things really being the way they should be, being balanced, good connection, and really having a good relationship. But it's going to feel like, and I always tell parents this, when you have an adult child, everything not everything, but most things you feel to do is not what you should do. Being the parent of an adult child is counterintuitive. It's the opposite of what we feel. So if you can remember that, that's going to help you navigate some of these feelings, and it's going to be in their best interest.
It is. And I
Yeah.
always say, Kathy, one of my common threads all the time is the only way that we change, the
Yes.
only catalyst for change is when we get to a place that's painful. I mean,
Absolutely.
we don't make changes when everything's going great and you feel
Nope.
great. It's
That's
when
right.
things are not going great or you don't feel great. And that
Yeah.
leads me up to this, how should we respond as parents of adult children when our children negatively respond to these new boundaries and they push back? What do we do?
Well, again, it's going to come back down to our emotional health and how well we can regulate those emotions, because everything in us is going to want to defend and get angry, and we've got to hold from doing that. And so you're going to have to practice that a little bit, because I would go into the conversation expecting to get pushback. And if you expect it, you stay calm, you stay respectful, and you just tell them, I love you. I want to have a healthy relationship. And this boundary is going to be part of that. It's the best thing for you. It's not a punishment. It's what's best for both of us. And I'm really thinking about you as I'm doing this more than anything, because that's truth. And then you have to hold your ground, because some adult children, depending on, their situation, be very manipulative, and they know how to make you feel guilty, and they know how to get a response out of you. So you're going to have to really be aware of that and manage that. I haven't said anything about this in the previous podcast, Laine, but I run a group for 7 years. I've run a group called Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, because that was my experience. And these parents that have adult children struggling with addiction, this is what they have to do all the time, because to get healthy, for their loved one to get help, they have to stop enabling, and they have to have these conversations. And people in addiction are very manipulative. So I know it can be done. And usually we have that initial hard conversation, and even the ones that are struggling, eventually they'll begin to respect that.
Yes. Well, and again, I've got consistency is so important in
Hmm.
maintaining boundaries.
That's
And,
it. Yeah.
I want to talk about real quickly what are the risks if you don't stay consistent, Kathy?
Well, you're not believable anymore, and you will be probably manipulated, and it's going to be very emotionally unhealthy for both of you. Consistency builds trust. So they look and they can trust the fact that when you say something, you're going to do it. It also creates clarity. It gets very confusing if one moment you're doing this and the next moment you're not. And that's on you. That's not fair to them. If today I'm going to do this for you, but tomorrow I'm not, and I'm going to get mad about it. So consistency builds trust and clarity. And that's what you want as you're navigating this relationship. And the
I
other thing
love
is,
that.
you're teaching them how to set boundaries in their life. You're modeling a healthy behavior.
Yes. I just love that. I love the clarity part. I don't think
Yeah.
I've ever heard it in that term. When you
Hmm.
have these boundaries,
Yeah.
it gives everybody clarity. There's no gray area anymore, but you've
Absolutely.
got to
Yeah.
be consistent
Yeah.
or else you will have gray. I mean, they'll wonder, is mom gonna fold today or is she gonna
Yes.
stand strong? It's not
Yeah.
fair to anybody, is it?
No, it's not. And it really does build mutual respect as you move along in this part of the journey, and you do it like that. It builds mutual respect for both of you.
Well, as you talk about the journey, how can we track the results of our boundaries and sometimes do we need to adjust them, without undermining the intention of them?
Yeah, I think the way of knowing we're doing this very well. We're doing it correctly. We're doing it in a healthy way. You're going to feel more peace and less resentment. The resentment is going to leave because that's a huge indicator on both sides that there's boundary issues. Also, is your relationship less tense and more respectful? And the evaluation of the boundaries, sometimes when we're first starting, we can be very rigid. And sometimes we do have to pull back and say, maybe that was a little too much. Let me pull back just a bit. But hopefully you're kind of communicating around that, or they were too loose. And so you have to pull in a little bit. So it's not one thing about boundaries, they're not static, they're not going to stay the same. When my son was struggling in his addiction, I had certain boundaries that I don't have to have anymore because he's 9 years sober and he's an amazing, responsible man. So I don't have to worry about the things I used to worry about. So boundaries will change and flow and evolve as your relationship changes and gets to a place that's more healthy and respectful for both of you.
And I have here boundaries help adult children develop independence, responsibility, and problem solving skills. And if you're looking at your adult children today, Kathy, and
Mhm.
they aren't independent, they
Mhm.
aren't responsible, or they're not being able to solve their own problems, that's a red flag that some boundaries have got to be thought about and put in place, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that is a huge indicator. And like I said, the resentment's going to be there too, because at some point, parents start to resent the fact that they have an adult child that's still dependent on them, like a 15-year-old. Nobody's going to be okay with that. And so boundaries create space for growth. Just like you said, boundaries create a space for them to be uncomfortable, for them to have discomfort. And like you said, discomfort creates growth and maturity and helps them to find their way. And it's a loving thing. If parents can understand that when we lovingly step back, it gives our adult children room to be who God created them to be. And we're stopping that sometimes.
Amen. Well, we both have children that
Hmm.
were prodigals. They were into drugs,
Yes.
alcohol, or
Yeah.
whatever. I do think I want to touch a little bit about, are boundaries different when we are talking with addiction and abuses of alcohol and things?
Oh, absolutely. It's like
Different.
I said, with my son, the boundaries I had 10 years ago when he was in active addiction or even in early recovery are very different than what they are now because with addiction and struggles that our adult children can have, often what happens is there's a lack of trust because there's been things that have happened that we've lost trust. And so that trust has to be built again. And so, one thing I always say to the parents I work with, and I kept in place myself, my husband and I both did, we always kept the lines of communication open. But it would be more from a place that we love you, but we will not support the choices that are harming you or enable you to continue to be in that harmful place. And that's kind of where you have to be with that. And it can be very, very hard. I mean, we had to get to some very hard boundaries, but I'll tell you what, and I'll just say this real quick. I was the holdout. I was the enabler. And it got to the point where I finally understood I was not helping, I was hurting by continuing to allow these things to happen. And finally told my son he could not live with us anymore. So he lived on the street for a couple weeks. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. But he will tell in his testimony today that that's when he realized he needed to get help on his own. And he did. That was the beginning of his recovery. Now, does it always turn out like that? Of course not. But it wouldn't have turned out any better if I had continued to do what I was doing because that's unfortunately not how addiction works.
And I did the same thing. I
Yeah.
enabled my son Stephen. My aha moment that literally required me to start some boundaries to save his life was
Yeah.
I realized I was funding these
Hmm.
decisions. I realized
Absolutely.
that I was replacing cars that shouldn't have been.
Yes.
So I realized, Kathy, I'm sure it just hit me, but I'm sure you've heard that analogy about coming down a mountain and you know how they have guardrails down the
Uh-huh.
mountain, and it's not to keep you from experience the beautiful mountaintop experience.
Right.
It's to keep you safe from going over the edge. And that's
Yes.
what boundaries are, particularly when you're talking addictions. When you put
Yes.
those boundaries up, what you're really doing, it's just a guardrail out of love, saying to
Hmm.
that child, I want you to live. And I want
Yeah.
you to live the life that Christ died to give you, not on drugs or alcohol or these self destructive choices. Do you think that's a good analogy?
Oh, it's an excellent analogy, and it's exactly what it is. And again, though, it's so counterintuitive. It's such the opposite of what we feel we should do. But when you're like us, Lane, and you've done it all the way that seems to feel good, and you realize I just spent 15 years doing the same thing over and over again, it didn't work. And when I shifted that perspective and did the hard thing, that's when things changed. So,
Wow.
yes.
That's so good, Kathy. Look, what are some misconceptions? What are some common misconceptions about boundaries that you wish more parents understood when dealing with adult children?
The two biggest ones is number one, they're unloving. I'm not a loving parent. In fact, it's just the opposite. You are showing more love by setting boundaries and letting them grow up, letting them learn and grow and be the man or the woman that God created them to be. The other thing is that if I set boundaries, it's going to damage the relationship. My experience is it's usually the opposite. The loose boundaries of overdoing over time will damage the relationship. Healthy boundaries will actually enhance it and create a connection that is amazing, that you almost don't even feel is possible. And it has everything to do with respecting their boundaries and them respecting ours. And it should go both ways. But sometimes it does,
Well,
as we talked about, it has to start with us, you know.
it does. It does. And
Yeah.
I just want a parent to know we've both been there, and what we both can tell you is it, like you're saying, it is
Yeah.
counterintuitive because you think you're helping them manage these issues, but really what you're doing is extending the pain frame. I'm
Yeah.
telling you from experience, it only extends. We don't want to continue to enable our children to not be independent, not to be sober, not and if we continue to live without boundaries with them, you're going to stay in that, right, Kathy?
Exactly. It's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle. You know, it's like I said, I think I said in the last podcast, maybe it was this one, short-term comfort for long-term pain, short-term discomfort for long-term health and happiness and connection. And you know, when you look at it like that, it's not a hard choice, but that short-term pain can be hard.
It
But
can.
if you
It
can see the
definitely is.
difference, yeah, it's
I
a
mean, you
pretty
had
good
to let your
exchange.
son, you had to let your son go live on the
Exactly.
street.
Yeah.
I mean, that's hard stuff, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask you this before we end. What are some common mistakes to avoid when we set our boundaries with our adult children? Are there some common mistakes that you could maybe just touch on for us so we don't? So if we're getting inspired today and realizing
Yes.
maybe
And we're
we
going to
need to
start,
set some healthy boundaries,
we're going to
what are some
implement these.
mistakes?
Okay. I think the biggest thing is we do it too fast. We do too, like we suddenly have this, oh, I got to set boundaries and we try to do too much at once. That's not going to ever work. We'll probably not be able to do it. It's not sustainable. So we're going to pull back and nothing is going to be accomplished. So it's got to be baby steps. And I think it's also understanding that boundaries are not about controlling anybody. It's about protecting yourself. So you got to figure out what is that balance there for me. If there's something coming to me that is not healthy for me, I'm setting a boundary for me, but I'm not controlling that other person. And so I think that's the biggest thing. And then the thing that we've already touched on really that boundaries are unloving, they're unkind, they're gonna cause my child to fail. It's all the opposite. You know, if we could really get that concept, it would just change so many people's lives. I know it would.
Well, it's so true, and it's really life saving.
Yes, it really
It's
is.
a life saving
Mhm.
implementation you must do.
Yeah.
Whether they don't have to be addicted for this kind of drama.
No,
I mean,
no,
it can
yeah.
just be they got to be able to be independent, live on
Yeah.
their own, to be thriving, healthy adults, right,
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes, absolutely. That is the greatest gift that we can give them because isn't that what we want for them? I say that being a good parent, being the best, healthiest parent. I don't want to say good because I think every parent, for the most part, is good. They're trying to the best they can. But being a healthy parent with a healthy relationship is going to look like you have a very independent adult child. And sometimes we don't want that because we want to keep them a little stuck so they'll want us and they need us. But if we're doing that, we need to look at us and say, there's some stuff going on with me I need to work on.
Well, and that leads me right up to Kathy. I have got to mention this wonderful program that you've put together and community and resources. Would you mind spending a few minutes on how you've created this community and how they can learn? And it's just so amazing. Would you go into that for me?
Yes, I'm so excited about this, Lane. It's something that God just recently really put on my heart. And it's because of everything we're talking about, this disconnect between parents and adult children. So I created, with God's leading for sure, a membership site for parents of adult children to talk about and navigate all these things that we're talking about. You'll have a live teaching, a workshop every month that you get, and a community with other members that you can share and talk to throughout the community on very like subjects. We've talked a lot about not doing this alone. This is a place that you can have that support that is needed right now.
And it's so important, Kathy, because everything we talk about is counterintuitive in
Yes.
today's world.
Yeah.
Being a healthy adult parent and and having a healthy adult child parent relationship. So I have to say, probably one of the greatest things I missed in all of the struggles was I felt so isolated and really a sense of shame because
Yeah.
I didn't really have a place, a safe place to come in and say, as a community,
Yeah.
things are hard and I need help. And so
Yes.
you've created that, right?
Absolutely. And it's so important what you said because that's exactly what we do. We isolate and we think we're the only one. And when we get into community of like experienced people, all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is everybody. I'm not alone. And when we're isolated, the enemy uses that to bring shame and tell us that it's only us and we're inadequate and we're a failure and all the lies he likes to say. And when we speak that out to other people, it exposes him and God's truth can come in. And that's where the healing and the freedom begin. So, yes, I just want to encourage whether it's my membership site or a support group, check PAL out, palgroup.org. If you have an addicted loved one, get into a group of people walking the same journey.
Well, Kathy, thank you. And setting boundaries with adult children isn't a sign of rejection. It's an act of love. Today, we uncovered that boundaries create safety, clarity, and space for both of you and your child to grow. Yes, the emotional pushback can be real guilt, fear, even conflict. But God has not called us to enable dysfunction, He's called us to truth in love. If you're struggling to draw the line, know that every firm but kind step you take is moving your family closer to healing and freedom. Keep holding that line, stay consistent, and trust that healthy boundaries open the door to stronger, more respectful relationships. And remember, peace in your home begins with courage in your heart. Thank you again, Kathy, for being here. And listen, warfare parenting. We are, faith based strategies for struggling parents of teens and adult children. We want to be here for you. We hope that this series has been beneficial and that you share this. And Kathy, one more time, where can they find you?
The best place to start is Instagram. If you have an Instagram account at Kathy Cunningham 717.
That's great. Listen, we have many free resources on the website, lainelawsoncraft.com. We're so glad you're here. You are not alone, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us on Warfare Parenting. Remember, you can overcome even the most challenging parenting battles with faith and the right strategies. If this episode has touched your heart or provided valuable insights, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Your support helps other struggling parents find the hope and guidance they need. Until next time, remain steadfast in faith and remember, together we never give up on our families. Visit my website too for my new book, Warfare Parenting, a daily battle plan to fight for your child. The first 10 days are free on my website and many other free resources. Go to LaineLawsonCraft.com.